Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falasz, and the Group Practice Accelerator podcast is on the air. Well, hey everyone, thanks for tuning in again this week because I've got a guest behind the mic with me today that you're going to want to hear from. And we're going to be talking about something that impacts every single one of us to some degree, and that's recruiting and staffing. I think we can all agree that whether you have one location or 1,000 locations or more, it's a really tricky topic. And on top of that, it looks really different depending on your structure and your size. So my guest and I are going to be covering everything from interviewing and hiring to leadership and sequencing, meaning right people at the right time in the right seat for your organization. Now, I know there's a lot to think about when staffing and looking to retain those employees. So stick with me here, and I know you'll take away some great intel from this episode. And if you've attended any industry events geared toward group practice, you may have already seen or met today's guest because he's a familiar face to many of us. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce expert and friend of Polaris, Jon Fidler, founder and CEO of Fidler Associates. Jon, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation here.
Yeah, great to see you. Welcome and Happy New Year. We're still January. It's okay to say
Yeah,
that.
we're getting rocking and rolling. Hopefully, everybody's off to a good start here.
Absolutely. Hit the ground running. Well, why don't we start here? So I know a lot of our guests are familiar with who you are, but some might not be. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. And I also want to hear about the genesis of Fidler and Associates. Like, how'd you arrive where you are and how did you identify that need?
Yeah. No problem. I'll try to unpack it all here. So, yeah, Jon Fidler, the founder and CEO of Fidler and Associates. Basically, we're an executive search firm that focuses within the multi-site healthcare space for leadership teams and headhunting. Basically, I've been called a lot of things, but headhunting, executive search, and so we work with really groups that range anywhere from 2, 3, 4 locations up to, I think our largest has right around 2,000 locations. So kind of have a pretty broad spectrum of background and experience with groups of all different sizes. But we'll go out and hire, kind of the easiest way we put it is not really anything in the office. So staffing, as far as like assistants or hygienists or clinicians, it's more of like regional managers up through C-level is our focus. And so, we love to help out any way we can and have a pretty good network within the industry. But, I came up through Patterson Dental for about 10 years as started as an operations manager, moved into sales. And then I always joke I got demoted to branch manager because I got paid less, but had a lot more headaches. And so I didn't know what I was doing. And got
Congratulations.
promoted. Yeah. Got promoted over here to the Austin area and kind of ran the Central Texas area for about 5 or 6 years, and just kind of found myself really loving putting teams together as kind of part of the central part of the dental community here. We'd have a lot of manufacturers, we'd have a lot of offices, and say, hey, if you know of anybody, or if you know of anybody, and I just kind of love doing that. And previous to my experience at Patterson, I was with the Arizona Diamondbacks, a baseball team in Phoenix, and I was in part of the scouting and player development departments. And at the time, I loved the job. I mean, it was great. It was in sports. It was fun. Everything was great. And you're not really quite sure when you're doing something what it's leading to. And as I look back on it, I was in charge of kind of putting teams together, and not every team needs 9 all-star, so you just kind of have this whole feeling. And then when I got to Patterson, I really enjoyed putting our team together too. We had service techs, inside folks, we had sales reps, all those sorts of things. And so as you're looking to build out those sorts of teams and hire folks, I just really enjoyed it. And I think at the time I didn't even realize it. It was just kind of like you did it just to survive and you were doing the job. And about 5 or 6 years into Patterson, I thought, man, I could maybe monetize this. I really enjoy doing this. And so kind of branched out, used my network from Patterson and started working with a lot of manufacturers and looking for sales reps and sales leaders. And then kind of got lucky and kind of fell into the DSO industry and found that there was just a little niche there that nobody had really touched yet. And there's a lot of need. They were growing rapidly at the time. They were having trouble finding folks. And so planted our flag there and just got lucky and connected with a bunch of different groups. And so At that point, we felt like there was a business there, didn't mess it up too bad. But basically, worked with these groups, found there's just a huge need there. Our network was pretty vast in it. Did a couple of successful placements, and at that point, just kind of took off from there. So we kind of found this little box. From there, we've kind of branched out into other multi-site healthcare. A lot of the skills and experience and kind of what the owners are going through are very similar. So, med spa, surgery centers, dermatology groups, chiropractic groups, they're all kind of funnel into this, and then the ancillary companies around it as well, kind of the technology platforms that come into it. They'll ask for us to go look for people that have a network in there. So it's just kind of blossomed into this like wonderful little hub of the industry. We kind of stay under the radar a little bit. We obviously go to events and speak and those sorts of things, but it's just been great expanding the industry and kind of, I call it like cross pollinating a little bit and pulling folks from optometry into dental, or sending dental from, dental folks into med spa. So it's just been this really neat little hub we've kind of created for ourselves. But that was the path, just kind of stumbled into it, and it's just been great.
Yeah, I was gonna say not really under the radar. I'm gonna have to disagree with you there.
Well,
You at all these events, you're sharing this knowledge and you have such great experience in the group practice space. And that's what I wanted to stress to our listeners too. Yes, I mean, I know you from dental. However, your expertise spans all multi-site. So it isn't just dental. And your guidance, although more executive headhunter, I'll put in air quotes around that, you have
yeah,
experience and knowledge outside of that. That's why I was mentioning things like sequencing, like what leads
yeah,
that executive search, how do you even know when to start that or
yeah.
when you need it, right?
Yep, totally, yeah, and as I got into this, obviously, I was dental heavy because that was my background and
Yeah.
experience, but as we got into this, a lot of these private equity groups started coming in and, we would do a dental hire for them, for a group that they were in partnership with, and then they're like, "Hey, you did a good job on this, could you help us out with this med spa?" And once we kind of started seeing the similarities and all of it, it just really blended and started making sense and expanded the network quite a bit. So it's very, very similar, even though the industries are different, it's all multi-site healthcare, and at the core of it, it's business, and the struggles are real and very similar for the owners.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, why don't we start kind of at a high level and then I might ask you some backtrack
Yeah.
questions. Let's start for our listeners at a high level. Like, why does building a a senior leadership team or true leadership team matter so much in multi-site?
Yeah, I think, as we kind of look at things as a whole, and we start off with, like I mentioned, a wide range of sizes and production levels and EBITDA levels and all these sorts of things. And so really what we found at the beginning of everything is there's just a ceiling. Like you can't be everything to everybody. And as an owner, it's I run a small business as well. You want to try to do everything and, be there for everybody and make sure the culture is right, make sure you're getting paid, make sure the production's there, the patient experience, all these sorts of things. And at some point you hit kind of a ceiling. And really, I think that that is something that people struggle with. They're typically doing fairly well. They want to kind of maintain control, all these sorts of things, but really you're just kind of limiting yourself. And for folks that want to continue to grow, you got to take your hands off the wheel a little bit,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's where the right leaders come in. And so, it's mainly for the folks that can, want to continue to grow and, um, I guess, have that mentality that you can't be everything to everybody, because you're probably losing more than you realize. And when you get people to focus on, it just makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, there is nothing more simultaneously flattering and terrifying as being the wearer of all the hats.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. A
that's
little therapy session. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, and that's a large burden to carry, but you won't notice all of the balls that you're dropping until you've dropped so many that it's
Yeah.
impacting the bottom line, right? The value
Yeah.
of your business. So,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
do you find is usually the catalyst for, hey, I need to add a leadership team? Because we stress this planning out ahead, 6 to 12 and having a
Yep.
strategic plan, but that's in a perfect world.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of time too, just being a small business owner, you get caught up in the day to day. You're just trying to survive. You're making decisions. And again, you're probably doing pretty well, so it doesn't feel like it's imminent that you're missing a lot of things. And there's some balls that are dropped, but I don't think we all minimize what that is. And so, to me, I think when you are able, again, maybe over a winter break or whenever you have a business planning, session, to take a step out of the business and really look at it as a whole. If you're finding yourself as the bottleneck, of a lot of things where you're having to approve everything. People are coming to you for direction. You're having to look at revenue cycle, you're having to look at compliance, you're having to look at all these different things. It's just almost impossible. And I think there's kind of an internal meter with it as well. You can't do it all. You're dropping some things. To me, that's kind of the time to start doing this. What it's hard for me to put like a hard number on it when you get to 4 practices. That's it. Because we have folks that have gone to 50, 60 practices and they're still running it. But they are really good at it. They are missing a lot of things, but they just can't give it up. So I don't know if there's like a straight number to give you of like, hey, when you get to this point, this is what you should do. But I think it's a bit of internal emotional feel of what's going on with the business. And then when you take a step back out and you look at, the data and the analytics and hey, we are missing some things, it's time to start considering for sure.
Yeah, and I know it's hard to kinda nail down those different categories. If we kinda take that back a little bit, not the executive leadership team, but like your first layer of leadership, I'll call it, within your small group. DeWalker and I were chatting back and forth about this the other day, talking about, at 3 to 5 locations, it's time to add a regional
Yep.
director of operations. At 5 to 10, maybe you've got 2 and a director of operations.
Yep.
But again, it's gotta come down to what's your plan?
I stress this too is every group is different, every owner is different. We have some owners that are just kind of running the business de facto. They just kind of gotten thrown into this and all of a sudden they realize they have a real business to run and but they want to be clinical. They don't like the business side and the HR side and the paying the bill, all those sorts of things. So really kind of reverse engineering it from what is the goal. Do you want to get back in clinically? Okay, well then we need somebody that can oversee the business side and everything. And typically that's an operator, in the beginning. But it could be a financial person. Do you as an owner want to continue? You're intrigued by the business side and want to go get office number 5, 6, 7 and don't want clinical. So then do we need somebody to kind of handle that side? So we kind of work with the group and the owner to hey, ideally, what do we want you to be so you can go do the fun stuff that you enjoy doing.
Exactly.
And then we'll kind of figure out where that gap is at and then find the right talent to fit into that.
Yeah, that's perfect because we do, when we're talking to clients, it comes down to that foundational question. What are you trying to build? And you have to
Yep.
know yourself well enough. Do I want to manage people? Some people are no, no, thank you. I would rather, have my hands on clinically
Yep.
and maybe have, my services and executive leadership team over here.
Yep.
Or do I wanna kinda make that transition from clinician to CEO? It's tough to do both. I know some people do both.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe they have that dialed in. I think it can be challenging to wear either of those hats fully at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a therapy session, for yourself, like you kinda
Right.
step back and you think like, "Yeah, I can do it all," but then maybe I'm not great at this, and so, if you're not great at the finances and you kinda just trust what's going on, there's probably some things leaking out where, we can't afford this or we can't do anything, but man, if you bring somebody in there and really focus on it and drive it, it's gonna kinda have an immediate ROI on it, and so, yeah, it's a little bit of a, internal therapy session where you have to say, "I'm not great at everything. There's people out there better at things than I am."
And you brought up a good word there, trust.
Yeah.
Finding just the right person because if they don't treat your business like you treat your business, then you've hired
Yeah.
the wrong person.
Yep.
So that leads me to another question. When you're evaluating these candidates for leadership, what do these great operators, what do they consistently look for?
So I think it depends, kind of backing up a little bit. Every group's a little bit different. And so when you're looking to bring somebody on, what I try to make sure folks know is you don't want a replication of yourself. I mean, obviously you want to find folks that think like you, understand the business, take ownership of things, treat it like it's their business, but they don't need to be an exact copy of you. A lot of times that's uncomfortable for folks, like maybe you're going
Sure.
to have to hand off a decision to somebody and they're not going to do it exactly like you would do it, but you have to trust, you have to see that they know what they're doing and buy into it. So, there's a doctor that we work with, Dr. Scott DeRossi, that we brought onto the team. He has this lead system that he implements when we work with groups. And there's different levels of things that we look for. And so, I think from like, does this person continuously learn? Are they empowering others to make decisions, which is, ultimately as an owner, what you have to be able to do? Are they aligned strategically with what we want to do, and are they able to carry these out? And then just because this is the status quo and been working at 3, 4, 5 offices does not mean it's gonna work at 10, 11, and 12. So, can they come in and disrupt some things, intelligently? You don't wanna come in and blow things up, but, do they have those sorts of things? So it's called the lead system, and there's definitely things we can look for that kind of bring those things out in candidates that you can kinda get a better judgment of what you're going to get.
Yeah, and my mind always goes to standardization, especially
Yes.
thinking multi-state. So they've gotta have, in my mind, a really good background and a history and a track record
Yep.
of laying out processes,
Yep.
implementing processes, and then being consistent with it. Because really, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, you can have all the SOPs in the world, and if nobody uses them,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you go from a hero-based system, which one person's just taking care of things, to now we have a strategic system, in place that they just kinda run itself, and then that way you don't have to oversee everything. It's kind of taking care of people are held accountable, and things should be working properly without just continuously micromanaging folks.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the common mistakes groups make when hiring leadership? Like, what are some of the pitfalls in that recruiting process? What do you see happening there?
Yeah, number 1 is the overhiring or underhiring of somebody, that is kind of I think our job is to kind of balance these out. You there's kind of 2 branches on that tree of which way you wanna go, right? And so, hey, we've got this issue here. That may be an issue now, but if we bring the right person in to fix it, then it's not gonna be an issue later, but that's what they're good at, so they've kind of worked themselves out of a job or solved that problem. So,
Yeah.
I think that the overhiring, everybody comes to us and they've got 3 or 4 locations and say, "Hey, I need a COO." And it's like, "Well, I don't know if you need a COO because that's a little bit more, you know, strategically thinking. That's down the road 3, 4, 5 years where you probably need some help tactically in the practices and putting policies and procedures in place." So you want to kind of make sure the overhiring or underhiring, somebody that hasn't done it before, are they able to do those sorts of things? So though, and whether it's titles, whether it's, skill set or experience, those are all things, you can leverage to attract the right type of talent. But I feel like that's typically the number one thing is that people just, I don't know if it makes them feel better or hey, I've got a COO rather than I've got a regional manager. Sometimes I think that that's kind of a little little comfort zone for them sometimes and makes them feel like they've got a bigger, operations than they have going on. But really, you don't want to hire somebody that, into a kind of a white collar oversight job when you really need somebody to get into the weeds and do the work. And so that's I think where the biggest mistakes made.
I was wondering about that. Like when you don't need a true executive C-level person when you want somebody that just they need to get their hands dirty and get in there
Yeah.
every practice, but overhiring for the title,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
comes to so,
Yep.
you know, the candidate loves to have that title, but
Sure.
doesn't match what you need. And
Yeah.
like DeWalker and I were talking, like you can't unwind a title.
Yeah. It's tough. And a lot of times,
You can,
you
but
can always kind of tier things and you can put different ladder steps in there to kind of get them where they want to be ultimately. But, ultimately, and I'll approach this from a candidate side. If they're in a very steady organization, they're doing well, why would they leave a larger organization to come to a smaller one? And sometimes it is title, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's benefits or flexibility or working directly with the owner or getting a kind of a growth stage of being held accountable for bigger decisions that are going to have immediate influence. So there's a lot of things I think as owners you can leverage a little bit. And sometimes title is in there to attract folks to say, hey, I went from a 1,000 location DSO where I was a manager, but I can come here and be a director or a vice president. And sometimes that's okay. But you've got to kind of, make sure it's all up front and there's boundaries set. But ultimately, it's something in your back pocket that you do have some leverage with.
sure. And I think there's an impact there with comp structure
Yeah.
as well,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a different
Yeah.
expectation and whether it's appropriate or not, I think there's sometimes it's simply not.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a different expectation on comp package and structure for a COO as versus an RDO.
Yeah. Yeah. And from a candidate side, sometimes they're willing to forgive a little bit on the comp side because they are getting a little boost in title. Or,
Yeah.
I can tell you, I'm the first to admit we've worked with COOs that probably couldn't do a regional manager's job. And then we worked with regional managers that should be a COO, and so it
And
really just depends on the situation. And I think diving in and kind of figuring out what is really the issues that we need to fix, not only immediately, but then can this person, like I said, fix this problem, then there's going to be other problems that expose. Can they grow into these other issues where they can solve them? So that's kind of the fun, you know, part of this is really dissecting not only now, but I relate it back to my Diamondbacks days of, hey, this kid is 20 years old and really good at this now, but he's going to put on 30 or 40 pounds and be a completely different type of player. And I feel like it translates into, kind of the world that we're in now is that they're really good at regional manager, but do they have the capabilities to grow into a COO or to grow into a VP or do those sorts of things? So kind of projecting, it is a big part of the process as well.
Yeah, great analogy. You've got to be able to grow into that future title. And I
Yeah,
would rather see somebody develop into that. I don't want to say it's like proving yourself, but
sure.
I guess it is a little bit, if we're
We all
honest.
do it. Yeah. Yeah. We
Um,
all have to.
and then there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
There-
yeah, and we get a lot of really good regional managers or directors at certain places, and they're just not as successful at other ones because the culture is different or the expectations are different or, what the owner's, end goal is, they're not aligned with or don't have that type of mentality. So it's really hard to kind of, really kind of peel the layers back and start putting these puzzle pieces together. But literally, that's the fun part. I don't know if I'm like crazy, but I just enjoy that part of it. And, a lot of it is just being real about it. You don't, as an owner, you don't need to say, hey, everything's perfect here. That's why you want to come work here. It's like, hey, I've got some issues. I want you to be, put these systems in place and, hold those folks accountable, but have that capability to do it where maybe they were handcuffed a little bit at a larger group. It's like, hey, here's just structured, this is what it is, where they can come in and be creative. So there's a lot of different skill sets and things that we look for.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I will kind of reiterate to our audience. And no, I've known John for a number of years here, and he gets to know his clients. And that's really what's critical is knowing what's appropriate and right for them rather than just saying, oh, here's how we do this. This is sort of the script that goes with it. And I think that there's some recruiting going on there that can do that. And maybe you're looking to fill, a hygiene position or one of those other positions within the practice. And that's a very different world.
Yep.
Uh, Now, what about owner being involved in like filtering resumes for the right person? Um,
Yeah.
how do you get to know exactly what is that right answer? And how do you filter
Yeah. So
you process who the no-goes are?
yeah. So, typically, I mean, we've got a pretty heavy candidate base. I mean, I think we've got like 35,000 people in our system. And, I probably, the glorious job of sitting on a phone call and talking to everybody and getting to know folks. And so we've got notes on people. We've got kind of their aspirations, what they're comfortable with. Do they want to go in somewhere where it's chaos or do they, and kind of bring some structure to it? Or do they want to go in somewhere that's a little bit more steady and they can just kind of manage and tweak things a little bit? And so, we have kind of that background on folks, kind of from our initial discovery calls and those sorts of things. And so when we get a call in, we have a deep dive call with the owner and with the group and say, hey, like let's make this as real as possible. Like, what does success look like? Where are the issues? What is this person really going to be doing on a day to day? And I think if we can kind of extract that out of it and not overcome, I don't want to minimize any of this because it's very important, but at the same time we've got to have the base. We've got to know on a day to day what's it going to look like. And then, at that point our sourcing team has folks that we've talked to or know that are in the market or currently working somewhere but have reached out and said, hey, I want to move to Orlando. I want to move to Phoenix. So we kind of have all those sorts of things. We can start putting those puzzle pieces together. But I think to know what you're going to get, it takes a little bit of time. A lot of these hires that folks have done before, it's hiring an assistant or hiring, not to minimize anything, but those are quick hires. Those are, hey, I like you. You're good. You've done this before. You know what you're doing. Let's plug you in and get going. This is a little bit more strategic and kind of our approach. I mean, and I don't want to give all our inside baseball stuff away here, but
Oh,
we will give candidates we won't return an email, or we'll give them an issue and then say, hey, by this time you need to get back, and so it gives us a little bit of dirt into how, aggressive they're going to be. Do they wait for us to call, or do they reach out and say, hey, I didn't hear from you, like, I just want to bring this to the top of your inbox? And it's like, oh yeah, we're doing that stuff on purpose sometimes. And so, there's just a lot of things we can kind of uncover to get into kind of, more of like the personality and approach that they're going to have, than just, hey, on the resume, yeah, they've done this before. They've implemented, policies and procedures. They've overseen compliance. They've done revenue cycle. Those are kind of the easy parts a little bit. It's, are they going to be a good fit for you? That's really going to be the where you dig in. And I think mentally you got to have a little bit of a marathon type approach to this. It's I have a book behind me, the John Wooden, it's be quick but don't hurry. And it's like you want to make sure we're weeding all that out so we know what we're getting.
Yeah, and not overthinking it.
Yeah,
However, putting these elements in place. Yeah, I was curious about like what, processes you use
yeah, yeah.
to identify those high caliber candidates. But on that same note, how do you ensure alignment between a founder and a newly hired executive? Because that, again, there's a little control thing there, I would
Sure.
imagine,
Yeah,
from time to
yeah.
time.
Yeah, and literally to reverse this too, from the candidate side, they're concerned about that as well. I mean, they're gonna leave
Yeah,
something to go work for somebody that, you know, those interviews are very easy to say, "Oh, everything's great over here, and
sure.
this is what we're gonna do, and I'll support you in anything, I'll let you make these." But it's like, okay, well, when it comes time where the rubber meets the road, like, are they willing to give that decision making up and be comfortable with it and go through some growing pains? Yeah, it's a unique dynamic that's kind of a two-way street, and that's why, when we get in, we just ask, like, this doesn't need to be if it was perfect, you wouldn't need this person. And so let's kind of break this down and say, hey, this is what it is. You don't have to be embarrassed by it, or, it's not exposing you in any way. We just want to make sure we're getting the right candidate that can solve those issues and then grow from there. So yeah, it's a two-way street, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah, that good point. And for those founders, what's
Yeah.
a mindset shift that they need to be thinking about that can improve their leadership hiring?
Yeah, so, to me, it all kinda starts with sitting down and making a list of where your struggles are at, or what you don't, maybe you're not even struggling at, you just don't like doing it,
Yeah,
and it could be finances, it could be HR, it could, and so I think taking a month or 2, just every day at the end of the day, sitting down and say, "Hey, I had these 3 or 4 instances where I was not happy, or I've got an issue I'm not great at, I don't know enough about it, I need some help here." And kind of starting on a physical sit down and call a timeout on yourself for 10 minutes and just make a little list each day. And I tell people, go on your iPhone, make a notes, and
yep,
every day just put like 3 or 4, and you're going to start seeing a pattern of what has been the issue. And then that kind of guides you to where you need to be. So I think from a mentality standpoint, to help them prep, is start envisioning, hey, if we had somebody in here to handle this, what else could I be doing that would elevate this practice or accelerate this practice or make me happier? We're all in this. I mean, it's the business, but we all have a life too. And I, been guilty of it myself, is we have issues at work and then you bring it home and just life's not as enjoyable. So there's a lot of these things that kind of feed into the system. And if you can kind of narrow down where you can fix that, it literally is going to enhance you probably physically on an ROI, and make you more profitable. But I think as a lifestyle, which we call them kind of hard ROIs, where I can, hey, we saved our practice $300,000. But there's also a soft ROI where it's like, my life has just gotten better, and I don't know if I could put a price tag on those sorts of things. So,
exactly. Yeah, little, peek into my world. I do use that notes feature on my phone, and I have a little file when, everyone gets overwhelmed with what they're
yep,
doing, or you have a
yeah,
bunch of deadlines coming up. I have a little file in there that, what am I willing to give up or add that would elevate my own well-being?
yeah,
And you'd be surprised what you can just say, that doesn't matter, that doesn't
yeah,
matter. It can't be all about, here's what I enjoy doing, and that's all I'm going to do. That's not reality. That's
yeah,
not how the world works. But there
yeah,
are things that you can mold and shape and maybe, take some accountability for
sure,
that can improve your well-being, like,
yep.
procrastination, guilty.
Yes, yeah. You figure that out, write a book. I think a lot of people are guilty of that. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Well, you were mentioning ROI, and I don't want to be remiss. Our listeners tune into us because they're trying to increase the value of their business. That's
yeah,
really at the heart of it, what they want to do, and they want to be satisfied with that legacy that they're building. How should owners be thinking about if they're going to partner with a strategic or an equity platform when they are considering adding those executive and non-executive, like the senior leadership roles? Like, how
Yeah.
does that impact them when it comes time to, exit, perhaps
Yeah.
partner with
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I think, a lot of times when groups will go to a market, the feedback is, "Hey, you're kinda doing everything." If you leave, a lot of things are gonna crumble, or, if we move you over to here, it's starting new and we've gotta implement all these changes and new people, and so that ultimately decreases the value of what they're going, because 'cause they're gonna have to invest in it from their side. Kind of a recent one that we had worked with was a med spa group that the doctor is unbelievable. I mean, he is a business person, he's a clinic, I mean, he is, just very, very focused on the business, very good at what he does, unbelievable energy, hard to keep up with, and, an ideas guy, but carries through. So, but he had gotten to a point to where I think they had 50 or 60 offices, and it was basically him kind of overseeing everything. And, he had some folks running things, but not really an executive team. So he decided he was ready to go to market. He had seen some, similar groups go to market, kind of saw what their return was, and that number made sense to him. So he went. And, the feedback that he got immediately was, "Man, hey, we love you. We love what's going on, but we need to know there's stability here and oversight and management and accountability and these sorts of things. And it's hard because you can't do that all." And so ultimately, he got the offer, from 3 or 4 different groups that were invested or wanted to invest, and it wasn't nearly the number that he thought it was. And so he reeled back. And so, we're trying to build that team around him now where, even though he's still involved in it, doesn't mean you have to give up total control of everything, but we have folks that are now focused on it. And I think he's kind of realizing like, man, I was just, tightening this up so much that there's not really room to grow and outside thinking and doing these sorts of things. So, it probably is a little bit eye-opening because folks feel like, "Oh, I've got this all under control. Let me go to market," and then they come back and it's like, "Well, yeah, you're great, but we need some other folks in here to kinda help you with a base, and we need a platform of executive team," whatever level that's at. It doesn't need to be COO and doesn't need to be CMO. It just needs to be a, director of o somebody that's overseeing certain things, and I think that gives them a lot of security from an investment side of these things are being paid attention to. There's a good base there, and it's a solid foundation. So I think those are the things I think, when you look at the money and the return on things is kind of having a support team around you that's able to focus on those things, and it'll pay off in spades at the end of the, whatever that is, the transaction or, bringing an associate or whatever it is, it just makes the whole organization more valuable.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right there. I agree. When people get laser focused on tightening things down, as you put it, that's a very good way to put it. They are so focused on value that they kind of miss the fact that you've got to look at this from a buyer's lens. If
Totally.
the buyer comes in and you don't have a leadership team, like you said, it could be at a regional level that's really ready and has a history of implementing and maintaining processes so that there's not a disruption,
Yep.
that's going to decrease the value of your business. Because if you have to bring in executive leadership or senior leadership, that's change, and change equals disruption, at
Yep.
least temporarily.
Yeah, totally.
You always have to kind of take a step back, and can't always be about here's what I want, here's the path we're on, this is going to happen. Put yourself in their shoes. What would a
Yeah.
buyer think
Yeah.
if X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, and coming from a small business side too, I want the business to be able to run without me. Obviously,
Ah,
I enjoy it. It's my business. But if I decide to go take a vacation for 2 weeks, I want the business to still run. And a lot of times that doesn't happen because, folks are calling for approvals or they're calling for directions on things. And so that to me creates a little bit of, create a lot of questions for somebody that wants to invest in this is, what happens if, something terrible happens and you're unable to work or you get sick for a couple of months. And so those sorts of things I think just create a lot of stability and are very attractive to folks that are looking to get into the business.
yeah, you brought up a very good point on the freedom aspect. And that's something we were just talking about on a recent podcast. Well, you don't have to duplicate yourself. You have to have people in place that can reproduce what you do,
Yep. Yep.
right? You have to
Yep.
be you exactly. That freedom to take a trip and, unfortunately, heaven forbid, the something sad happens,
Yeah.
because it does,
Yep.
you're in a better place to be prepared for that kind of thing. Okay, last question, John.
Yeah.
If listeners take one thing away from this episode, what should that be?
Yeah, I think just to me, it's being real with yourself. A lot of times we're all successful. We're living a good life. All we own a business, whatever it is, and so you kind of get into this. Hey, everything's okay. And so I think if folks want to grow, kind of take what that next step is or the end game is, and then kind of reverse engineer it as we talked about a little earlier. I think take a look back at your business, document where the bottlenecks are, document where the issues are, document where you're doing things that take you away from what you enjoy doing or what's going to actually accelerate and grow the business, and just start making lists of those, and things will start exposing themselves of where we need the help or where the opportunities are to bring somebody in and help be a part of your leadership team. So to me it's just not to oversimplify things, but you run your business, nobody knows it better than you, but you also know where your flaws are at, and a lot of times we bury them. And so if we can kind of write them down and see them, they expose themselves and give us direction of, okay, these are things that are going to help me, not just stabilize this group, but when we bring folks in, we want to grow this group, and we want to have better patient experience, have better revenue cycle, have better EBITDA, and all those sorts of things start kind of coming through that list. And you've just got to be able to kind of put the puzzle pieces together, say, how do we solve this? And so I think if there was one thing at the end of this that folks could do is, I know it's very hard to do, is just call it a little time out here and kind of work on the business, not in the business, if that makes sense. And, just kind of document what's going on and where your frustrations are. And then that'll give you a little bit of guidance.
Yeah, great advice. A really good takeaway. Like we promised, that is something that you can take 15 minutes, sit down by yourself, whether it's home or first thing in the morning, get to the office a few minutes early, shut your door,
Yeah.
before anybody starts knocking on it, and
Yeah.
take that time for yourself. I think that's a really critical piece of advice there. Thank you for that.
And hard to do, but yeah, it needs to be
It
done.
is. It's hard to get started, and some days you're not going to want to do it, but
Yep.
it's important to kind of reflect. But what's the best way to get in touch with you for our listeners?
We're not picky. So I literally, email, cell phone, website, all that stuff kind of feeds in. So
Okay.
our website is www.fidlerassociates.com. My email is jfidler@fidlerassociates.com. And then, I'm happy to give out my cell phone if people want to text or have questions or really anything. I mean, we try to be a resource and a value. Obviously we want to do some hires, and that's what pays the bills around here. But, people don't go through this all the time, and they're asking questions that's literally like my favorite part of this, is trying to figure out where we can help. So, my cell phone is 512-550-8604, and text, call, email, whatever's easiest for everybody else, and we will get back to you and start the conversation.
Wonderful. And I'll link to all of that in the show notes too. Just, John, thank you so much for joining
Yeah,
us.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime. Just your expertise and advice run so deep in multi-site. Like you said, everything from Diamondbacks here in my backyard, and to med spa and dental, all aspects of healthcare. So please reach out to John with questions, and he and his team will be there to help you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. That was awesome.
As always, if you'd like to schedule some time to learn about any of our Polaris expert advisory services, or maybe there's a topic that we haven't covered yet that you want to hear about, you can send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com, or you can reach us by visiting our website at polarishealthcarepartners.com. Go up to that Contact Us button and leave your info there. We'll get back to you right away. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague or friend, and be sure to leave us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator podcast.